The Faroe Islands are 540 square miles. In that space, there's a lake that hovers above the ocean, a waterfall that falls straight into the sea, a wooden house someone has lived in since the 1300s, and a parliament older than any standing government on Earth. We're going to visit all of them, and everywhere else worth stopping. Tindhólmur's 5 towering sea stacks were once connected as a single mountain before the ocean carved them apart. Gjógv village is built around a 200-meter-long sea-filled gorge that acts as a natural harbor carved by ancient glaciers. And Múlafossur waterfall drops directly from a mountain into the Atlantic Ocean without touching any land in between. But the geography gets even stranger when you factor in the people. Mykines village has only 11 residents but maintains a helicopter landing pad because winter storms make boat access impossible for months. Hester Island's 22 residents share just one surname because they're all descended from a single family who settled there in 1583. And then there are the places that defy all logic. Kalsoy Island is so narrow you can walk from one coast to the other in just 10 minutes at its thinnest point. Litla Demon Island has no human inhabitants but supports 150,000 sheep. That's more sheep per square meter than anywhere else on Earth. Coulter Island has been completely uninhabited since 2002, but still maintains a functioning post office that's never used. Now let's explore the most incredible places these islands have to offer. Have you ever seen a lake that lies to your eyes? Sørvágsvatn sits just 40 meters above the Atlantic, but stand at the right angle and your brain swears it hovers more than twice that height. A massive sheet of water seemingly defying gravity, perched on the edge of a cliff with the ocean far. It's one of the most famous optical illusions on Earth, and no photograph prepares you for it. You hike across windswept grass, the terrain soft and uneven beneath your boots, until the view opens up and there it is. Deep turquoise stretching across 3.5 square kilometers, the largest lake in the Faroe Islands, framed by green cliffs that plunge into white surf. The wind carries salt and silence in equal measure. At golden hour, the water catches fire, and the illusion only deepens. Trust me, your camera won't know what to believe either. 70 million years ago, volcanic fury thrust rock from the ocean floor. What remains looks like a stone fortress that forgot to crumble. Tindhólmur rises from the North Atlantic in 5 jagged peaks. The tallest, Kuvan, clawing 860 feet straight up from the waves. From a boat, the scale hits you. Sheer walls of dark basalt plunge vertically into churning white surf, while impossibly green grass clings to every ledge where seabirds dare to nest. Locals will tell you a giant once stood here, turned to stone by the gods for his arrogance. Honestly, you almost believe it. Mist wraps around those spires like something alive, dissolving and reforming throughout the day, so the silhouette never looks quite the same twice. Late afternoon light carves deep shadows between the peaks, and the whole island glows. Ancient, defiant, and completely indifferent to time. Until 2006, the only way to reach Gásadalur was by foot, over a mountain. This tiny village on the western edge of Vágar was one of the last places in all of Europe without a road. While the rest of the continent built highways and rail networks, 16 residents here still hiked a steep mountain pass just to get groceries. You arrive through a single lane tunnel carved through rock, and the moment you emerge, the Atlantic opens up beneath you. Green grass-roofed cottages cling to a shelf of land between towering cliffs, and at the village edge, Múlafossur waterfall plunges straight off the cliff into the ocean below. No barrier, no railing, just raw earth meeting sea. The isolation that nearly killed this village is exactly what preserved it. At sunset, golden light floods the grass roofs while mist rises from the falls, a place that time genuinely forgot, then reluctantly found again. Picture a place where puffins outnumber people by the thousands. Mykines sits at the westernmost edge of the Faroes, a speck of green clinging to the North Atlantic, home to fewer than 10 permanent residents, but tens of thousands of nesting puffins every summer. You step off the helicopter or ferry and the sound hits first. Not silence, but a low, constant hum of wings and calls echoing off sea cliffs that plunge hundreds of feet into churning water. The grass under your boots is impossibly green, thick with wildflowers and riddled with burrows where puffins waddle just an arm's length away, completely unbothered. A narrow trail winds toward the old lighthouse perched on a separate islet, connected by a footbridge over open ocean. Salt air fills your lungs, heavy with earth and sea. At dusk, puffins wheel overhead in massive arcs against a sky that never fully darkens. Did you know there's a village in the Faroe Islands where tropical plants grow inside a gorge carved by the North Atlantic? Gjógv, named after the Faroese word for gorge, sits at the northern tip of Eysturoy, and its 60-meter-deep cleft in the rock creates a microclimate so sheltered that vegetation you'd expect in far warmer latitudes somehow thrives here. Sounds impossible in a place battered by Arctic winds? I assure you, it's real. You walk between clusters of colorful houses, grass-roofed and defiant against the gray sky, until the land simply drops away. Cliffs plunge into churning surf below. That gorge has served as a natural harbor for fishermen since the 1800s. Boats hauled up through a crack in the earth itself. Come early morning, when mist threads through the green hills, and breathe in wet grass laced with salt. The silence here weighs something. Someone has lived inside this wooden house since the 1300s. Over 700 years of unbroken human presence, making Kirkjubøargarður the oldest continuously inhabited wooden house on Earth. You walk up to it expecting a museum, maybe a rope barrier. Instead, smoke curls from the chimney. Grass carpets the rooftop in a green, so vivid it almost glows against the gray Atlantic sky. This tiny coastal village once served as the cultural and religious heart of an entire nation, hosting the Faroe Islands' first bishopric back in 999 AD. The ruins of a medieval cathedral still stand nearby, roofless and open to the wind, stones darkened by centuries of salt and rain. Traditional boats rock gently in the harbor below. Arrive at dawn, when soft light pools across the cliffs and the centuries feel paper-thin, like you could reach right through them. Did you know that Vikings established a parliament here around 850 AD, making it older than any standing government on Earth? Tórshavn carries that weight quietly. A capital of just 13,000 people, one of the smallest on the planet, yet somehow home to an opera house, a thriving art scene, and over 1,000 years of unbroken political tradition. You wind through Tindhólmur, the old town, where grass-roofed buildings in rust and midnight blue cling to a rocky peninsula jutting into the harbor. The smell of fresh catch and North Atlantic salt hangs in every narrow lane. Fishing boats knock gently against the docks while modern Nordic architecture rises just behind them. That's the thing about this place. Centuries don't compete here, they coexist. Come when early morning fog rolls through the harbor, softening every edge, and the whole capital feels like something half-remembered from a Viking saga. The largest island in the Faroes holds a secret that rewrites history. In 825 AD, long before any European parliament existed, Vikings gathered on Streymoy and founded the Lagting, the oldest parliament on Earth. You stand where democracy itself took root, surrounded by grass so impossibly green it looks painted against the Atlantic's dark blue. Cliffs plunge into churning water, puffins nest on sea stacks just offshore, and at sunset, golden light floods every ridge. Over 1,000 years of wind, and these stones still remember. Did you know the highest point in the entire Faroe Islands isn't on some remote outer island? It's right here on Eysturoy. Eysturoy rises 880 meters, and on a clear day from its summit, you can see Iceland. Vikings settled these slopes over 1,000 years ago, and honestly, the place hasn't changed much. Emerald hills roll endlessly into cliffs that plunge straight into cobalt Atlantic water. Sheep outnumber people here, by a lot, wandering freely across ridges and valleys like they own the place. Because they basically do. You walk through villages like Funningur, where maybe 20 houses cling to the hillside, smoke curling from chimneys. Not a sound but wind and bleeding. At golden hour, the grass glows almost neon against darkening ocean. Did you know there's a town in the Faroe Islands where the harbor actually freezes solid in winter, and people lace up skates to get to work? Welcome to Klaksvík, the second largest town in the archipelago, whose name translates to the Bay of the Clam. You step off the road and the salt air hits first, laced with something deeper. The rich, unmistakable tang of fresh fish from the country's largest processing plant. Colorful houses cling to the waterfront like scattered paint chips against dark volcanic slopes. Mountains tower on every side, funneling wind through narrow streets where fishing boats creak and knock against wooden docks. At golden hour, the harbor turns molten. Gulls wheel overhead. The whole town glows amber, suspended between raw industry and an almost impossible quiet. The trail ends at a scattering of weathered fishing huts, paint peeling in salt wind. This is Trøllanes, a village of maybe 15 people perched on the northern edge of the world. But here's the thing, over 200,000 puffins nest along these cliffs every breeding season, making this one of the largest colonies on Earth. 200,000. You walk through absolute silence, emerald grass bending under fog, and then the cliff edge hits and suddenly the air explodes with wings. Puffins everywhere, darting, hovering, crash-landing with beaks full of silver fish. The noise is extraordinary. At dusk, the colony settles into a low murmur, and the Atlantic stretches endlessly below, cold and dark, while those little orange feet grip the rock face like they own it. Did you know that Viking settlers once stood on these exact cliffs, scanning the horizon for approaching ships? Kirkjubøargarður served as a strategic lookout over 1,000 years ago, and standing here now, you understand why. The vantage is commanding. Sheer rock faces plunge straight into the North Atlantic, and on a clear day, the ocean seems to stretch past the edge of the world. Wildflowers speckle the grass in purples and yellows, clinging to slopes so green they almost glow against that deep Atlantic blue. But look closer at the cliff face itself. Puffins nest in every crevice, tucked into burrows just beyond arm's reach, their orange beaks catching the last light of a Faroese sunset. The wind carries the faint calls of seabirds, and below, waves carve patiently at stone that has held firm for millennia. Water thunders down 459 feet of sheer cliff, and then vanishes straight into the Atlantic. Fossa, the tallest waterfall in the Faroe Islands, doesn't end in a river or a pool. It plunges in two dramatic drops and feeds directly into the ocean. Think about that for a second. Most waterfalls land on rock. This one meets waves. You stand on the grassy ledge above, wind pulling at your jacket, and watch white water dissolve into salt spray where cliff meets sea. Emerald moss clings to every surface, so vivid against the pale cascade it almost looks unreal. Locals say spirits haunt these cliffs during fierce Atlantic storms. And honestly, catch Fossa on a moody morning with mist curling upward and you might believe them. Did you know there's a village in the Faroes where people live quietly at the foot of cliffs that soar 754 meters straight out of the ocean? Vestmanna looks almost sleepy from a distance. Colorful houses clustered along the shore, fishing boats rocking gently in the harbor. Then you look up. Some of the tallest sea cliffs in all of Europe loom directly overhead, raw and vertical, draped in impossible green. You board a small boat, and the scale hits you immediately. Waves crash against rock faces that dwarf everything, carving narrow channels where puffins nest by the thousands. Salt spray coats your skin as the engine echoes off walls of ancient basalt. At sunset, those cliffs glow amber against the Atlantic, a scene that makes the quiet village below feel almost defiant. A 20-minute ferry ride from the capital, and you arrive somewhere with its own species. Seriously. Nalsoy shelters the only known population of the Nalsoy mouse, a creature found absolutely nowhere else on Earth. This tiny island, the smallest in the Faroes with a permanent population, has quietly evolved its own ecosystem, cut off just enough by cold Atlantic currents to become a world unto itself. You step off the boat into air thick with salt, and the calls of seabirds wheeling above sheer coastal cliffs. Vibrant green hills roll upward, almost impossibly vivid against the deep ocean blue. Walk north toward the lighthouse, and fog clings to the ridgeline like something alive. Generations here have lived by fishing nets and sheep. The land remembers every one of them. Somewhere on these wind-battered cliffs, a practice survives that most of the world abandoned generations ago. Mykines is one of the last places on Earth where puffin hunting still happens, and happens sustainably, using methods passed down for centuries. No modern equipment, just skill, patience. You crouch at the cliff's edge at dawn, the grass impossibly green beneath your knees, and watch thousands of puffins wheel against a slate-gray sky. The village itself clings to the hillside, a handful of colorful houses dwarfed by the landscape around them. What strikes you isn't the remoteness. It's how deliberately this community has chosen to preserve something ancient while the rest of the world moved on. The ocean roars below, and the puffins keep circling, indifferent to time. Every spring in Gjógv, locals haul their old, unused belongings down to the shore and throw them into the ocean. A ritual cleansing, out with the dead weight, in with renewal. The whole village participates, and it sounds wild until you stand there watching it happen, feeling that collective exhale. Gjógv itself clings to the eastern coast, its name drawn from the Old Norse word for river, a nod to centuries of fishing and trade. You'll spot turf-roofed houses here, Grass so impossibly green it looks painted. Still lived in, not museum pieces. Real homes with roots growing overhead. Late afternoon is when this place transforms. Golden light spills across the cliffs, catches the ocean, and turns every weathered wall warm. Smoke drifts from a chimney. Somewhere, a door creaks open. The moss-covered cliffs of Múlafossur rise 800 meters straight from the Atlantic, and locals will tell you something unsettling. This mountain is watching you. They call it the sleeping giant, but the legend insists the giant isn't sleeping at all. Look closely at the silhouette against a Faroese sunrise and you'll see it. The shape of a figure, reclined but alert, eyes fixed on the horizon. Villagers believed that if the giant ever truly stirred, catastrophic storms would follow. So they treated this peak not as a summit to conquer, but as a guardian to respect. You stand at the base, wind tearing across the ridge, emerald moss clinging to vertical rock while the ocean churns hundreds of meters below. The giant watches. You feel it. Did you know there are sheep in the Faroe Islands that can swim between islands? Not a myth. On Hester, the smallest inhabited island in the archipelago, a unique breed takes to the North Atlantic like it's nothing, paddling from shore to shore through frigid open water. Sounds impossible? I assure you, locals have watched it for generations, stretching back to the Viking Age. You step off the ferry onto emerald hills so vivid they almost hurt your eyes against the deep Atlantic blue. A handful of colorful houses cling to the hillside. No crowds. No noise. Just wind, wool, and waves crashing against cliffs that drop straight into the sea. At golden hour, the grass glows like something out of a fever dream. And those fearless sheep graze on, completely unbothered. 50 people. That's it. 50 people clinging to this clifftop since the 14th century, and somehow Bor hasn't just survived. It's outlived empires. You round the bend on a narrow gravel road, and the village appears like something conjured. Grass-roofed houses, deep green against volcanic black, perched above an ocean so blue it almost hurts. Vikings once launched boats from these shores, trading fish across the North Atlantic. 7 centuries later, their descendants still tend sheep on the same wind-battered slopes. But here's what gets me. This tiny settlement has quietly reinvented itself around ecotourism without losing a single thread of its identity. At sunset, the light turns the whole village amber, and the only sound is wind, wool, and waves crashing somewhere far below. Did you know someone still lives inside a turf-roofed house here? Not as a museum piece, not for tourists, actually lives there. Gásadalur holds the last inhabited traditional Faroese turf house, built in the 19th century, its thick grass roof blending so seamlessly into the hillside you might walk right past it. Step closer, and that earthy, damp scent hits you. Soil and moss and centuries of wind. The village itself once thrived as an 18th century trading post, and you can still feel that quiet resilience in its bones. Colorful fishing boats rock gently in the harbor while the fjord mirrors the mountains in long silver streaks. At golden hour, the whole scene softens. Ancient walls glowing warm against dramatic cliffs, proof that some ways of living were never meant to disappear. Did you know the first Vikings to reach the Faroe Islands made landfall right here? Eysturoy, the southernmost island and arguably the wildest. Cliffs at Bínisver plunge nearly 500 meters straight into the Atlantic, their faces streaked with moss so vivid it almost glows against the dark basalt. You stand at the edge and the wind tries to claim you. Below, waves detonate against rock that Norse settlers first touched over 1,000 years ago. Few travelers make it this far south. The reward is silence, raw coastline, and puffins wheeling through salt air like they own the place. They do. The wind here doesn't just blow, it whistles. Locals call Kalsoy the Flute Island because gusts carve through its narrow valleys and sea caves, creating an eerie, ever-shifting melody you feel in your chest. You hike across grass so green it almost hurts, salt spray stinging your lips until the land simply ends. And there, clinging to a knife-edge cliff with nothing but ocean hundreds of meters below, stands Kalsoy Lighthouse. Tiny, white, defiant against everything the North Atlantic throws at it. At golden hour, Kunoy rises across the strait like a shadow painting. The wind keeps singing. It never stops. Did you know the world's northernmost lighthouse clings to a cliff edge here in 80? Built in 1893, it still stands, defiant against waves that have battered this coast for over a century. You walk through the village first. Colorful houses, almost absurdly peaceful, sheep grazing like nothing matters. Then the path opens up and the Atlantic roars below you. Salt air mixes with wet grass underfoot. At sunset, the lighthouse catches gold while clouds shift like they're being directed by someone with impeccable taste. The village sleeps behind you. The ocean never does. Only one breed of sheep on Earth exists on a single island, and you're looking at their home. Coulter, nearly abandoned, rises from the Atlantic as a fortress of green cliffs and absolute silence. Once a thriving settlement, its last permanent residents left decades ago, but the Coulter sheep stayed. They roam these wind-carved hills like they own the place, because they do. You step ashore and the air hits you immediately, wet grass and salt tangled together. Turf-roofed houses sit empty against slopes so vivid they barely look real. At sunset, the cliffs glow amber, and nothing moves but wool and wind. Did you know there's a village in the Faroe Islands that houses the world's only museum dedicated entirely to whale hunting? Strendur sits quietly along its fjord, grass-roofed houses clinging to hillsides where the salty tang of sea air mixes with damp earth. The village's name simply means the strand, and for centuries, this shoreline has shaped everything: livelihoods, identity, culture. Inside that small museum, centuries of controversial tradition meet uncomfortable modern questions about conservation and heritage. No easy answers here. Just honest ones. Early morning mist rolls off the cliffs, softening the coastline into something almost dreamlike. Strendur doesn't shout. It lingers. Did you know the cliffs of Moher aren't even close? Retvetur rises 750 meters straight out of the North Atlantic, one of the tallest sea cliffs on Earth. That's nearly half a mile of vertical basalt, and nothing between you and the drop. Vivid green moss clings to the rock face, impossibly bright against dark stone, while clouds curl around the summit like something alive. Local legend says a giant once lived here, hurling boulders at passing ships. Standing at the edge, wind roaring upward from the waves far below, you almost believe it. Did you know that one small harbor town once hunted whales to near extinction? Then built the world's first whale museum to confront that very history? Húsavík sits on Iceland's northern coast, where colorful wooden houses cling to the waterfront and the salty breeze carries the scent of fresh catch. Early morning is when you feel it most. The bay glassy calm, snow-capped peaks reflected in the water, and somewhere out there, humpbacks breaching. A town that traded harpoons for binoculars. From windswept cliffs to grass-roof villages, the Faroes showed us a land where ancient traditions dance with wild Atlantic storm. If these remote islands stirred something in you too, subscribe for more hidden corners of our world. Which Faroes village would you call home?